Welcome to The Explainer. We are diving straight into what is, without a doubt, one of psychiatry's most stubborn, intractable puzzles. Seriously, it's a condition that has completely baffled medical science for half a century. But today, we're looking right at the bleeding edge of clinical research to see how a totally unconventional treatment, something you might not expect, could actually hold the key to finally unlocking it.
Look, before we get into the science, we really need to sit with a number that's just staggering. 5 to 10 times. Anorexia nervosa carries the absolute highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder out there. We're talking an excess mortality rate up to 10 times higher than the general population. And it's not just the severe physical complications driving this. Tragically, suicide plays a massive, massive role. This is an illness of immense life-or-death severity.
And honestly, despite those devastating statistics, the harsh reality is our current treatments just, they fall short. They produce really limited long-term recovery. Think about this. Roughly 70% of individuals with this condition never even receive treatment. For decades, doctors and therapists have been hitting a brick wall. Why? Because the fundamental architecture of the illness itself is the obstacle. It's been this profound neurological mystery that just resists almost every intervention we throw at it.
So to understand why it's so incredibly tough to treat, we kind of have to completely reframe how we think about it. Most of us assume anorexia is primarily a disorder about hunger or food or weight, right? But neurologically speaking, it's actually characterized by extreme cognitive rigidity. We're talking about an unrelenting, deeply entrenched perfectionism, a brain that is constantly on high alert for threats, and a profoundly distorted sense of self. In neurology, they call this impaired set shifting, which basically means the inability to switch gears between different rules or mental frameworks. The brain is quite literally locked in place.
Actually, think about it like a computer issue. Hardware versus software. Standard therapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy, that's essentially our software. It assumes you can challenge harmful beliefs through rational discussion. But here's the catch. When a patient's set shifting is neurologically impaired, when their underlying hardware is physically rigid and stuck, those therapeutic conversations never really land. You just can't update the software when the neurological hardware is totally locked up.
And this exact same locked hardware problem happens with medication too. We call it the serotonin paradox. Normally, standard antidepressants like SSRIs work by flooding the brain's synapses with serotonin. But in an anorexic brain, specific serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2A receptors, are chronically underactive. They're dialed way down, so the SSRI floods the system, but the receptors just aren't catching the signal. It's like shouting into an empty room. Psilocybin, though, it is a direct 5-HT2A agonist. It doesn't rely on flooding the synapse. It bypasses that whole bottleneck, binds directly to those receptors in the prefrontal cortex, and effectively forces the system wide open.
Which brings us to the real magic here, the core mechanism. In this context, researchers aren't looking at psilocybin as some sort of nutritional intervention, and it's definitely not an appetite modifier. Not at all. Instead, it acts as a profound neurological disruptor. Think of it like shaking up a snow globe. It's a compound that zeroes right in on the brain circuits that make eating disorders so incredibly hard to break, completely disrupting that rigid hardware we were just talking about.
Okay, so how exactly does it force the brain system open? Well, there are 3 converging mechanisms happening at once. First, it disrupts the default mode network. That's the part of the brain responsible for those endless, repetitive loops of body monitoring and rigid rule-making. Psilocybin temporarily dissolves those loops. Second, it raises global brain entropy. Now, entropy sounds like a fancy science word, but it just means it massively increases neural flexibility. It lets the brain explore entirely new pathways. And third, it promotes something called BDNF, which actually drives the physical growth of new connections in the brain. It's literally promoting long-term rewiring. How amazing is that?
All right, let's get into the hard evidence from the frontier. In 2023, Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris and his team over at Imperial College London ran a really pioneering open-label pilot study. They brought in 10 adults who had been suffering from long-standing anorexia, people who had battled this for an average of 7 years and frankly had failed to respond to every single standard treatment out there. They gave these participants a preparatory dose and then a full therapeutic dose of psilocybin paired with intensive dedicated psychological support.
And wow, the data they got back is nothing short of extraordinary. After just 2 sessions, 2, at their 3-month follow-up, 7 out of 10 patients showed clinically meaningful reductions in their eating disorder symptoms. 70%. I mean, in a population that the medical community had basically struggled to help for years, they were suddenly seeing reduced perfectionism, way better psychological flexibility, and a much, much greater acceptance of their own bodies.
But it doesn't stop in London.
Independent, parallel investigations are kicking off across North America right now. Over at UC San Diego, researchers are running Phase 2A trials combining psilocybin sessions with acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And guess what? Their early reports are perfectly matching the Imperial findings. They're seeing patients experience these incredible improvements in body image flexibility, along with a significant drop in their obsession with weight. It is really validating to see this replicated.
Now, to really grasp why this works so profoundly on a psychological level, we have to touch on a concept called ego dissolution. During a therapeutic psilocybin experience, there's a temporary softening of a person's rigid self-construct. For someone with an eating disorder, their entire identity, their self, has often become totally built around strict rules. You know, what thinness means, what absolute control means. Ego dissolution creates this vital breathing room, a distance from those entrenched narratives. It temporarily uncouples who the patient is from the extreme perfectionism that's been keeping the disorder alive.
And this qualitative finding, what the patients actually said, brings such a profound human element to all this data. Multiple patients reported that for the very first time in years, they were, quote, observing the eating disorder from the outside. They shifted from feeling like they actually were the illness to just witnessing it, like it was a trap they had been stuck inside. That mental shift, that ability to step back, that is the absolute hallmark of why this therapeutic approach is such a game changer.
Okay, pause. Here is the critical reality check, because we have to be responsible here. While the science is incredibly compelling, the path forward is highly complex. Treating anorexia nervosa comes with some very specific safety challenges that are totally different from, say, using psilocybin for depression or addiction.
We've got to consider some major medical hurdles. First off, there's just medical frailty. We're talking potential cardiac issues, electrolyte imbalances, low bone density. This means the most severely ill patients need strict medical stabilization before they could ever even participate. Second, the therapeutic relationship here is intensely charged. You are asking someone whose entire illness is rooted in control to enter an altered state and just surrender. That takes an incredible amount of trauma-informed trust. And third, eating disorders aren't all the same. What works for restricting anorexia is going to require totally separate trials to see if it even applies to bulimia or binge eating.
So, if you take one single thing away from this explainer today, let it be this. Psilocybin offers a window. It is not a cure. It's definitely not a magic bullet. What it actually does is create a brief, super powerful period of heightened neuroplasticity and psychological openness. It essentially opens a window where the standard therapeutic work, those software updates that normal therapy just couldn't force through the locked hardware, can finally actually take root.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely thrilling thought. If these early results hold up, we could be looking at massive Phase 3 trials being designed within just 3 years. For a condition that has literally resisted every single psychological and pharmacological innovation we've thrown at it for half a century, it really begs the question, are we finally unlocking psychiatry's most intractable problem? It's a real, evidence-based hope built on a mechanism we've just never had access to before. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on this fascinating horizon of research.